Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice. The people's champion, champion, champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a joy. Oh, what a joy. Oh, what a peace. Oh, what a peace. How great this country could be. Could be. Respecting your rights. Respecting human rights. What a wonderful nation this could be. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization.
Welcome, good afternoon to all our listeners. This is the first episode of Let's Talk Justice. That is a program by Jamaicans for Justice that we are doing in partnership with Bridge 99 FM. I am Michael Jackson, the Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice.
And I'm Jade Williams, the Policy and Advocacy Specialist at Jamaicans for Justice.
So before we get into the formalities, Jade, I think it's important that we recognize our sponsor, or donor rather, Open Society Foundation, who has been with JFJ in terms of our Justice for All campaign. And this is another important initiative that we're doing in terms of public education. So can you just tell the listeners who is JFJ?
Of course. So JFJ stands for Jamaicans for Justice. We've been around since 1999. And our purpose is to serve our citizens by participating in upholding and ensuring that their rights are protected. And we do so mostly by holding the government accountable, but we also do so by doing public education. And that's what we're doing here today with our Let's Talk Justice program.
Yes, and JFJ, we provide support to all persons who would see their rights violated by the state, including those children in state care. We have been advocating particularly around their rights being respected by the state, certainly, as well as other issues where they face discrimination publicly. We also work with persons who are affected by gender-based violence, and if it is that your right is violated by any member of the security forces, JFJ stands ready to support, because ultimately we're here to ensure that the state is held to a greater level of account. And I think as we talk about state accountability, one of the things that we're going to be doing with the program is focusing on just doing a review of some of the main human rights issues that we see emerging from the current and previous week, if you will. And one of the things that we see coming out from last week, Jade and listeners, and JFJ, we spoke out, and as you can imagine, not everyone would agree with us. But it's the controversial statement that was made by Minister Dr. Horace Chang, where he articulated that the police, when confronting persons who are armed, he said, gunmen, I will just stick it at persons who are armed, that they should ensure that when they fire, they do not miss. And certainly we saw that as perhaps a shoot-to-kill utterance. But just to add, before I ask for your perspective, Jade, just to conclude here, that it's not just the shoot-to-kill comment that was of concern for the organization, but the minister went on to indicate that if it is that any member, or any individual rather, was armed during such confrontation, no ambulance would be sent, no medical provision would be given to those persons. And that was what JFJ particularly took an issue with.
Yes, and I can understand the public's frustration with the current state of crime, with our increasing crime rate, and wanting to see effective solutions. But again, we have to balance, of course, the human rights of persons as well as the safety of other persons. So, and not necessarily in response, but to comment on the minister's statement, the police do have a use of force policy, and within that policy, it encourages them to assess situations and use the appropriate amount of force that is necessary.
Yes, proportionality.
Right. So once it can be justified, once it is a proportionate response,
Yes.
we have no issue with the police responding and doing their duty. Where we take issue is where it seems as though the minister was insinuating that those citizens who would have been caught in the altercation no longer have a right to certain treatment from the state.
And I just want to advise those who are listening in, because Jamaicans for Justice, we've gotten quite a bit of backlash. As you can imagine, there will be different opinions on certain things. But, you mentioned the use of force policy, and there's nothing in that policy, by the way, for those who are not aware, that mandates the officers to shoot to kill anybody. It doesn't talk about shoot to injure. It makes certain provisions on a different section, section 3, section 18, section 51. And I'm urging people to go and read it. JFJ can provide the support to you. But a particular section 3, I'm speaking from memory here, I stand corrected, it makes reference, clear provisions, that if someone is injured, the police has a responsibility to ensure that medical provisions are provided. So Dr. Chang's statement is quite alarming because it actually counters the use of force policy that individuals are expected to adhere to. But we can shift gears a little bit.
Yes. We're actually going to give you a fact of the day. So we have our human rights fact of the day. And each week we will be giving you a new one for us to consider, and you can look at our social media pages if you want to engage with it further. And today we're talking about equality before the law. So this is a right under our constitution, and it basically states that all citizens, if you're a victim of crime, you have the right to approach the law for redress, and where it is that you are accused of a crime, you have the right to a fair hearing. So the equality before the law is saying that regardless of how or your background or how you approach the legal system, you should be able to either get redress or to be able to have your matter heard fairly.
So no matter where you look like, where you come from, who
Absolutely.
you associate with, and so on.
None of your
also
characteristics should prevent you from accessing the law.
All right. One of the things for JJ in recent times that we have been making a submission around, and we're urging Parliament to consider, is the Firearms Act, which is a bill that the government certainly is putting forward to address crime.
Absolutely.
And we have some concerns about the mandatory minimum sentence. But on September 6th, the Minister of National Security, Dr. Horace Chang, opened the debates on the Firearms Prohibition, Restrictions and Regulation Act 2022 in the lower house.
Right, and the act speaks to, among other things, a mandatory minimum sentence, life sentence, that is, for illegal possession of firearm, and a mandatory 15-year sentence for other offenses. And this is whether or not there has been injury caused with the person that has the possession.
The bill was passed by the lower house on September 7th and is scheduled to be debated on September 23 and 24th in the Senate. And following the debates, Jamaica will see the declaration of a gun amnesty, and the amnesty will allow for persons who may be in possession of an illegal firearm to surrender the weapon without charges being brought. Dr. Chang, interestingly, in his presentation, did acknowledge that there are different levels to gang involvement in terms of gang leaders versus youngsters who may be recruited by larger gangs. And he noted that the zones of special operations, for example, it has social interventions, which he hopes will address the issue of youths who are involved in gangs and criminal activities.
Well, in our submission to Parliament regarding the new Firearms Act, we would have outlined, Jamaicans for Justice would have outlined, among other things, our concerns about the mandatory minimum sentences, as they do not serve, based on our research, as a deterrent to crime, but they may place a very heavy burden on our already overburdened prison system. So,
all right, so with us to discuss the new firearms legislation is former Member of Parliament and Minister of Education, Reverend Ronald Thwaites, and Attorney at Law, Bert Samuels. Welcome, gentlemen. Do we have
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
Is this
Hi.
Reverend Waits?
Ronnie here.
Hi, good afternoon. And we have Bert Samuels with us as well. All right, we're not hearing Mr. Samuels, but Rev, it's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
And I'm Michael Jackson, and here with me is Jade Williams.
Thank you. Greetings to you both.
All right, so do you have any views on the proposed bill in terms of the implications for the mandatory minimum sentence?
You know, I have a memory.
Yes.
I was around when we had that sentence of indefinite detention for possession of a firearm and gun crimes in
Yes.
1970s, and it didn't work. The judges, quite correctly, don't like minimum sentences, or in that case, indefinite detention, which had many resemblances. And so they become very, very wary of conviction.
Yes.
Therefore, the aim that the legislators perceive is often defeated, apart from the fact that the minimum sentence is repugnant to the idea of judicial discretion, and, in my view, is immoral.
If I may ask, Minister, we had looked at the Criminal Justice Administration Act, and I think Dr. Chang and Mr. Golding would have also pointed out a section in the Act that is being touted as something that could help to restore the loss of judicial discretion in the current bill. Do you have any thoughts on that section? It's 42K in the Criminal Justice Administration Act.
Don't remember its terms right now, but that would be a left-handed approach, wouldn't it? Where you mandate something that you say is absolutely essential and appropriate, which is the government's position, and then you leave some kind of backdoor loophole for mitigating it. That's not how we should be approaching jurisprudence.
And just to clarify for the listeners, the section that Jade mentioned is really speaking to the possibility of an appeal, where if it is that the judge believes that the mandatory minimum sentence is unjust, then they can give the offender a leave
recommendation,
to appeal,
right. Yeah.
and then it will be up to the Court of Appeal to determine whether or not such appeal will be granted.
You ever heard the expression "passing the buck"?
But you know, Rev, one of our biggest concerns around that so-called safety valve, if you will, is the affordability issue. Who exactly will stand to benefit if such a backdoor deal is left? Do you have any views on that when you talk about vulnerability and social class and all of these things?
Well, thankfully, we have a much better legal aid system than when I began practice in 1970. So one presumes that there would be legal assistance for persons, the majority of whom come from a class that can't afford legal assistance to do all those things. But again, that's just a sop. Why don't we just be straightforward and recognize that we're not looking at the causes of crimes. We're not asking why people join gangs. We're not penetrating where the firearms come from and why people drudge them.
Yes.
And this is not to say that you don't have to have strong policing and strict legislation, but this is a panic reaction with a largely political motive.
Yes.
As it was in 1974, by the way.
Yes, yes. And, you know, this is something I know Jade reminds us all the time of, that we need to clarify to persons that the issue with the Firearms Act goes much deeper and graver than we think. Because the mere possession of an illegal firearm means that someone will get an automatic life imprisonment sentence.
Yes.
So when we're talking about a mandatory minimum sentence, we're acting on the assumption that an appeal will automatically be granted after 15 years.
Not an appeal, a parole.
Parole, my apologies. Thanks, Jade. So from your lens, Rev, do you have any views on around, the parole system and how those mechanisms work? Is it something that there's some surety of being given after 15 years when you think about a youngster, for example, who may be caught with an illegal firearm?
No, not at all. It's not certain. By the very nature and definition of parole, it is a consideration which is by no means automatically granted as to a person's suitability for release after a long period of incarceration. So that is very limited. I remember the people who were locked up indefinitely for having a cartridge,
Yes.
Right.
which I believe is going to be similarly caught in as I read this legislation. We learn nothing from our past, ladies. We don't understand that the strong measures are indicated, no doubt, but that to do it this way is in fact to wreak an injustice. One, it is to violate the victim. Please don't let us I can hear the echoes of people saying, listen to these people forgetting the victim. We're not.
Yes.
We're asking for constructive, rehabilitative, as well as deterrent measures, and simply to sentence people for life. After probably 3 or 4 years in custody, because that's this legislation has to be seen in the context of the way the judicial system works or doesn't work.
Yes.
Yes, is not going to solve our problem.
All right. Thank you so much, Reb. We actually have
Mr. Samuels.
Mr. Bert Samuels on the line with us. Welcome, Mr. Samuels.
Yeah, may I apologize. I had connection problems.
That's not a problem. Thank you very much for joining us. But you've joined us at right now. We're about to go for a short break. So if you could just stay online and we will come back to you right after the break.
Imagine your advertising dollar reaching your Caribbean and diaspora target beyond borders in a single rotation. It happens only on the bridge. Call now to advertise 876-669-5000.
Hi, I'm Ronald Thwaites, and I'm the host of The Public Eye and The Open Mind on the Bridge 99 and Irie Jam in the tri-state area. This program will tell you the truth about life back a yard. Fair, open talk. No gossip, no slander. We want to listen to your concerns. We also want to help you with your problems in JA. We at The Bridge rate you and affirm our oneness as citizens of this blessed land we love. So join us now on Wednesdays on The Bridge, crossing the waters, linking Jamaicans and Jamaican lovers everywhere.
Bridging the Caribbean gaps across the globe on social media. We are Facebooking, IGing, TikToking, and Twittering at The Bridge 99 FM.
Rip it, mix it, sip it. Liquor Sippers, the brand new Simply Delicious Milk Mix. It comes in 2 tasty flavors that everyone's talking about: Berry Boss and Vanilla Vibes. It's so simple. Just rip the packaging, mix in the cold water, and sip away. It's easy, affordable, so anyone can enjoy. Whether you're feeling like a Berry Boss or you're ready for the Vanilla Vibes, Liquor Sippers has the flavor for you. Made by Jamaicans, for Jamaicans. Ask for Liquor Sippers at your supermarket or wholesale near you. Liquor Sippers, the Simply Delicious Milk Mix.
Distributed by Massey Distribution.
Wow, wow! Yo, this is Baby Shama, you're locked in on the bridge. Can you hear me? This is my story. This is the bridge story. Hey, wow, wow!
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. I am Jade Williams, Policy and Advocacy Officer at Jamaicans for Justice, and with me is Mikel Jackson, and also with us is Mr. Bert Samuels, Attorney at Law. And right now we're discussing the new firearms bill. So Mr. Samuels, are you here?
Yes, I'm with you.
And still with us is Reverend Thwaites, of course.
Great. So, Mr. Samuels, we had a long discussion with Reverend Thwaites before you were able to join us, and we spoke about some of the implications of mandatory minimum sentences. But what I'd like to pick your brain about is about the omission of issues related to the planting of firearms in the bill. Having read it thoroughly, we have seen no mention of what we would consider to be a major issue involving corruption that has not been mentioned. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting that you have said that, because I've always said that when you're going to make draconian legislation, then you have to have, legislation accompanying that makes it harsh punishment for those who seek to, as you've said, plant evidence on persons. And I've had experience in the court. There's a David Clark matter, which is a matter of record in the press, where his ammunition was planted on him, and it was proven to be so planted in the court because the member of the army who recovered the ammunition from the bushes at Riverton City was able to give a statement to the director of public prosecution that he recovered it from the bushes. Whereas the police officers from the Hunts Bay police station said that they went there, they were not there on the soldier's account, and saw the ammunition in the pocket of David Clark. So the case had to be thrown out. Now, we have followed through with this acquittal because it didn't end there for me. I wanted justice to be done across the board. And with the passage of 5 years, there has been no movement. The police officers remain in their job, no investigation. I engaged the public defender. I wrote to the DPP and the Commissioner of Police, repeating what happened in the trial, sending the statement of the soldier, which contradicted the police officers who I've said were not on the scene. They planted themselves on the scene. So there were two plants, planting themselves on the scene and planting the ammunition in the pocket of David Clark.
And just to say it, this is something that we have seen documented by reports coming from JCF itself, Jade, as well as a 2018 Indicom report. So this is not just a single matter that Mr. Samuels is referring to. This is something that is systemic. And I think we have to acknowledge that, certainly.
And I think in the context of our conversation with Mr. Thwaite, we would have spoken about mandatory minimum sentences. What are the implications now with no provisions for planting, mandatory sentence of life imprisonment for possession? What are we looking at here in our legal landscape?
Yes, these mandatory sentences have this awful feature that nothing draconian is done to the persons who seek to cause people to be imprisoned, and it has been exposed. So this mandatory sentence issue is historically, it's been a problem for Jamaica. You recall before 1972, for possession of a spliff, you had a mandatory 6-month imprisonment period.
18 months.
18 months, thank you. Which had accompanied it when Rastafarians were taken to the prisons. They were trimmed so that the discrimination against Rastafari was heightened by this mandatory sentence, because it meant not only the person went to jail for a user amount of ganja, but was trimmed by the prison rules.
Oh, wow.
So similarly, it has implications for persons based on social class and other.
That is it. It is aimed. So that the stigma, the anti-Rastafarian stigma that plagued the police force, which heightened in the Coral Gardens beating and persecution of Rastafari, that was a continuing situation in Jamaica. So that these mandatory sentences come to affect the certain social classes, as you have said.
Absolutely.
It's the young man in the ghetto who is going to be,
And as you say, young, I consider those children who are at risk, those children who are being influenced by gangs. Where do they fit into this landscape? Because I don't know how familiar you are with the bill, either of you, with the bill, but we would have seen where the implication is that we should use the Child Care and Protection Act as well as the Gun Court Act in order to deal with children under the Firearms Act. But what we've realized is that using those acts who have their own problems are not sufficient in protecting children who are vulnerable to
Jade is
certain
putting
gang
it
activities.
mildly. Under the Child Care and Protection Act, our youngsters can also be placed in prison for up to life. And for those who are age 12 and 13, you can get up to 25 years. So to you, Reverend, you sat in the chair of Ministry of Education, which would have addressed young people. Do you have any concerns around this?
Great concerns. First of all, let me greet Bert Samuels and thank him for his advocacy on the matter. We have to ask some fundamental questions. Apart from being distracted and distressed at the current level of violence and murderousness, what is attracting young children to so-called gangs? What is it in there that do we think we can get all of them into prison? Do we think that we're somehow going to be able to use these measures to cause some surcease in violence? It is amazing how blind the legislators are being. What about is this legislation being complemented by the attention to the atrocious living conditions of the majority of our people, the weak families, the encouragement of uncommitted sex as a prime exercise of personal freedom, the charade of equality in education, the exclusion of moral learning, the putrid ethic in our society that you must win at all costs and that money can get you anywhere?
Yes.
I mean, if you told me that you needed serious legal penalties in order to bring people together to ensure that they were into a matrix where they were being rehabilitated, retrained, resocialized mandatorily, then I begin to understand what you're trying to do. This is not. This is a classist thing. This puts Horace Chang, Andrew Holness, Marlene, whatever lady, on the side of Governor Eyre and Baron von Kettleholt rather than on the side of Bogle, Sharp, and Gordon.
Those are strong words, Rev.
Really, yes.
But
Yes, they are.
we're coming up on to end the interview. What is your last word, starting with you, Rev, and then to Mr. Samuels, to the Senate, who will be meeting to review the bill? What would you urge them to do?
Discernment and courage, and could they please shed the two things? One, the knee-jerk party loyalty on the one hand, and two, just this very palpable, understandable fear of the moment, and look at fundamental causes.
To you, Mr. Samuels, you're urging to the Senate, and then we take.
My urging to the Senate is that they should trust our judges. Judges should be given the latitude and the discretion to impose the appropriate sentence. The Constitution is not arranged in such a way that the Parliament passes sentence, and that's virtually what's happening.
Yes.
We have marginalized our judges who can get social inquiry reports and pass the appropriate sentences in the appropriate circumstances.
All
Thank
right.
you very, very much for both of your contributions. We'd just like to say
Thank you. And again, just to recap, that's Reverend Ronnie Thwaites, who is a former MP and minister, as well as Mr. Bert Samuels, attorney at law. Thanks so much, gentlemen, for joining us.
okay,
Thank you.
and
Goodbye.
thank you. And the time by KFC is now 1:31.
KFC. Feel happy to save at KFC with a chicken box combo for just $615. KFC, it's finger licking good. The time by KFC is.
I can't hear you. The time by KFC is now 1:31.
We up, yeah. Free up, yeah.
Calling all bridge builders to the Bridge 99 FM, your global partners for outside broadcasts, connecting you from Jamaica to the world.
Where will we go?
From Kingston to Portmore, downtown, Spanish Town, Canada, USA, and as far as Dubai, we keep you connected across the 7 continents of the globe.
Can I get a number?
Call us at 876-630-3153 for information about partnering with the Bridge 99 FM.
That's 876-630-3153 to take your outside broadcasts to the world. Bridge 99 FM. Live terrestrially in your territory. And also online at thebridge99fm.com.
It's about business for me. I'm in, I'm out, easy access to all my meetings.
It's the range of rooms for me. I love the gym. I love the pool.
The restaurant and the bar do it for me. It's definitely the service. Our hotel in the heart of New Kingston, Jamaica's business capital, seamlessly blending boutique-style guest service with the highest level of professionalism, luxurious accommodation, and every modern amenity. Book now, 876-968-6222, or visit ourhotelja.com.
KFC. Feel happy, feel happy, feel happy. Feel happy to save at KFC with a chicken box combo. A piece of delicious chicken, fries, biscuit, and Pepsi for just $615. KFC, it's finger licking good.
Chasing purpose is a journey of self-love, self-development, healing, and spirituality. Our talk show aims to empower, inspire, and uplift through thought-provoking conversations. Guided by our 4 pillars: nurturing faith, setting intentions, pursuing aspirations, all while we are living boldly.
Every time I feel can't do no different. Swear me off a win.
Won't you join us every Monday and Wednesday, 10 a.m. to midday, for Chasing Purpose, where we sow seeds others will benefit from.
The Bridge 99 FM.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. If you are just joining us, you would have missed a very engaging and informative conversation with Reverend Ronnie Thwaites and attorney at law Bert Samuels. We thank them again for their contribution. We were here discussing the Firearms Act and the implications that it may have should it be passed as is for our citizens. I would just like to remind those of us who are listening that you can call in and share your views on what was discussed. You can call the studio line here at 876-676-4996, or you can send us a WhatsApp message at 876-239-7583. And so, some of us would have been sharing our views for the past week on our Instagram pages, on our public view poll. Mikkel, can you share some of that information with us?
All right, so thanks, Jade. The question that was asked to persons: what are your views on the mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years to life imprisonment for illegal possession of firearms and other offenses? And the views varied. Persons did call us as well to ventilate some of their concerns, but let us read a few. Person said, sounds good to me, or sounds great to me. I guess that individual is agreeing with the mandatory minimum sentence. We will hope to change that person's views in a short while.
Absolutely.
There was one that I liked, but I will have you go read another, and then I get to that one in particular.
Oh, well, one of our commentators said it seems extremely long, knowing that this is going to predominantly affect young men, a point that Reverend Thwaites and Mr. Samuels would have articulated as well in our discussion.
Yes.
And also, where are the guns coming from? An important point for us to be able to determine and to really address this firearm issue.
So there is this one from Croward, JM. And he quotes Sir Thomas More's Utopia, a book that I read in my early years. For if you suffer your people to be ill-educated and their manners to be corrupted from their infancy, and then punish them for those crimes to which their first education disposed them, what else is to be concluded from this? But that first you make thieves and then you punish them. And
Wow.
it is
And
such a profound statement.
Yes.
So to break it down, our education system has failed individuals, especially those from the inner city communities, the low-income communities. This mandatory minimum sentence, debatably so, but based on history in Jamaica and certainly other jurisdictions, you see wherein this particular law stands the possibility of criminalizing persons. So you go in the prison system, Jade and listeners, as low-level offenders, and then you
come out as a mastermind.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So,
and with that, we'll go into our first caller.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, so I was listening into the discussion earlier. I find it very interesting. But, I mean, so I'm a bit torn on many of the issues that are being discussed, but I do think that it needs to come with a lot of nuance, because the first thing that I want to recognize is that the government is trying to solve a real problem.
Absolutely.
And a problem that is growing, and a problem that's affecting people very strongly. In fact, we're one of the most murderous countries in the world. So when you're trying to solve an issue that big with so few resources, you have to look at everything that's available to you and then take action, right? So one of the first things I'd like to do before I begin my longer comments is just to make a distinction between like the specific bill that's being discussed to introduce mandatory minimums and the issues that exist in the social landscape that definitely need to be fixed in the like solution to crime, right? Because while those issues do contribute to crime and while they do need to be fixed, they're not mutually exclusive to the proposal that's currently on the floor, right? And I think one of the biggest frustrations that has been expressed over the past couple of months and couple of years is where people commit really egregious crimes. They're involved in all kinds of criminality. They're found guilty, but then they're treated in a way that's viewed as being very lenient in the eyes of the general Jamaican public. And when this treatment is given to criminals and the general, public doesn't understand what's going on, it leads to a sense of frustration in the criminal justice system, which then results in a moment like this.
If I may, I would say that the factors that you would have said are not mutually exclusive to the issues being addressed in the bill are the factors that would reduce the frustration, where persons feel as though persons aren't being adequately punished. Because I think one of the reasons that perception continues is that the crime rate has not gone down despite the measures that we have been taking. So I think that we have to consider whether or not increasing penalties and adding penalties is really going to be what is a long-term and effective solution. And I think when we had the discussion earlier, both Reverend Thwaites and Mr. Samuels would have indicated that what we really need is a holistic approach, because the way how we've been thinking about it, trying to isolate the violence from the social issues, it's not effective. And at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that a lot of social issues do drive violence. And so before we are able to before we are able to say that a harsher penalty is a more effective way to do this, I think we haven't adequately explored the social issues and how much effect they are actually having on the rate of crime here.
And whether or not we've given JCF the resources to actually do intelligence-based policing, to actually catch the criminals, and then to see greater levels of conviction based on the evidence before them. Because whether or not you have harsher penalties in place, if you're not catching anybody, then it makes for naught, yeah?
Right, so that's a part of the holistic solution, right? So we can proceed with social investments, we can resource police better, but there is still that case where a case might be prepared, someone is found guilty, they're sentenced to 2 years, and then the people in the communities who testified against them are now up against them 2 years later. Right, so there also needs to be an assessment of what goes on. And one of the things that I've been paying close attention to is the sentencing guidelines that's used by the judges, right? That's developed within our system. It's something that we have control over in terms of, the judiciary in Jamaica. It's not something that's like constitutionally entrenched deeply. It's not something that's impossible to change. And every time frustration is expressed about the kinds of sentences that are being meted out. I remember a particular case, a young boy was mutilated and was assaulted, and the person who did it, I think got sentenced for less than 5 years, right? So when frustrations are expressed about that, the response cannot be, well, the sentencing guidelines are there and that's what judges are following, so because of that, we can't do anything to solve the problem, and then we move on.
Yeah, but we have to look at judicial discretion in both ways, because what you're describing is the sentencing guidelines putting a limitation on judicial discretion. And that's the same thing that the Firearms Act is aiming to do. So I think we'll have the same effect. Because one of the things that we would have seen with, for example, a mandatory minimum sentence in jurisdictions other than ours is that when they limit judicial discretion, judges instead don't convict. So what we won't have is greater levels of conviction and more deterrence. What we will have is judges feeling uncomfortable with the proportionality of sentence in comparison to the crime, and then they don't convict. So if we do that, I think, as I said, and as we would have been articulating, acknowledging all frustrations of persons, we still have to take it from a holistic standpoint in order to make a real effect. Otherwise, whatever effect we make will be limited, and it will not be the kind of holistic response that we would really expect. So I think we should really hold our government to that level of accountability to ensure that while they are doing their best to address what is a crisis issue, that they also seek the holistic response that will give us the long-term solution that we need.
All right. Thanks so much. We can take the next caller.
And then we'll go to our break.
All right. One of the things, Jade, before we get into the next caller, that we have mentioned, and in terms of the solution, we made reference to our urging to Parliament that even if they retain what we deem to be an injustice with a mandatory minimum sentence, what kind of judicial discretion can be reintegrated or actually placed, because it was never there in this particular piece of legislation. But for JFJ, we did make reference to the UK's sentencing guidelines. So if you could just educate the listeners on that proposal.
Simply put, the UK would have tried to do a tiered response to a crime issue, as a gun possession issue, while using mandatory minimum sentences. But constructed it in such a way that there were limitations to, one, increase the judicial discretion that's not normally associated with mandatory minimums.
Yes.
But also...
So if you're a first-time offender,
young
person.
It gives it, like I said, it's a tiered response. So if you're a first-time offender, there is a specific sentence. If you are second-time or multiple offender, there's a specific sentence. Right, so there are several issues that would have come out in the UK Act that would have shown that there are more nuanced ways to introduce a mandatory minimum sentence.
Yes.
And as we would have articulated, while we do have a general stance against mandatory minimums, we do understand the government's need to balance the concerns of citizens. So we ask if they will continue to retain the mandatory minimum sentence, that we allow for certain levels of judicial discretion that are currently missing from the approach that we are going to use.
All right, so we're going to take a break, but just reminding persons that they can call 676-4996 and WhatsApp us at 239-7533.
Your advertising dollar reaching your Caribbean and diaspora target beyond borders in a single rotation. It happens only on the bridge. Call now to advertise 876-669-5000.
Download the Bridge 99 FM app now from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store.
Quick Cart is the new click. Get convenience at your fingertips. The reliable way to get your order quick. Any store or restaurants for your food fix. Quick Cart is the new click for sure. Click efficiency waiting in your app store. More than the plate, we're bringing you more. Order online and get it straight to your door. Tell a friend. Quick Cart is the new click. Tell them better make this one stick. Quick Cart delivery at the right pick. Good customer service, I forget. Experience the new Quick Cart.
Visit quickcartonline.com or download the app to any device.
Walkers would bring the heat, we bring the flavor. It's summertime,
Walkers would then spice them hot and the spice them ready. Summertime pull up them ready. Turn up the bass and treble. Hot it up, bubble, get the knife and fork on the double. We bring in the heat, we bring in the flavor. We bring in the heat, we bring in the flavor. We bring in the heat, we bring in the flavor.
Walkers would summertime, we're taking over.
Why choose when you can have both? Walkers would bring in the heat with flavor.
From Black Bridge to the George Washington Bridge, from the top of the Empire State Building to the Blue Mountain Peak, from the Grill Point to Morant Point to Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, New York City.
The people's champion. Our mission is love, our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice, the people's champion, champion, champion. Justice, justice, justice. Rights to life, rights to liberty. We want justice, we want justice.
Okay, welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. You're with Jamaicans for Justice, and you're speaking to Michael Jackson and Jade Williams. And for today, we're focusing on the firearms bill. And we're urging Senate, of course, that as they deliberate on this important piece of legislation, that they ensure that all persons, especially the vulnerable groups, are appropriately catered for. And with us on the line is Chris. Chris, afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, ladies. How are you?
We're doing well, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yes. I must say before I make my comment, thank you guys for having this discussion. It's really important and it's a beautiful discussion thus far.
Great.
What I want to add, though, is that we have mentioned it throughout the program that one of the groups that will be significantly affected by the decision to have a mandatory minimum sentence in this regard is those at-risk youths. And the problem I want to also highlight is that what many Jamaicans and persons would take into consideration is that our prison system is not structured in a way to factor in these individuals and their rehabilitation to come back into society, nor does it take into consideration how it is that their human rights ought to be respected. And I'd like to turn your attention to the Department of Correctional Service report earlier this year highlighting many human rights violations that happen within these institutions and the lack of a well-structured rehabilitation program and educational system. And if that's the reality, then if we have a legislation in this manner that puts all these young persons there, the issue with crime that we're having now is an issue that will be continuing to face even further down the line. And what the Parliament is currently doing then is creating a system that is attempting to fix a problem now, but not truly bringing any resolution to the problem, especially in the future.
Yes.
So that's my 2 cents on the matter.
And before you leave, one of the things, and thanks so much, Chris, you made mention of the Department of Correctional Services report. For those who are not aware of the implications of that report, you have youngsters who were, for example, incarcerated, because we're not going to be prettying up in the language here, on the basis of being uncontrollable for petty crime, and they are locked up by the state. The educational provisions were so poor to the point where the teachers did not stay because of wage issues, to the point where the disciplinary measures were questionable in a number of these juvenile detention centers. So you're talking about the state itself committing acts of violence towards our youngsters. And by the way, this is in the juvenile system. What can you expect when these persons, our youngsters, then go to prison, into adult facilities? How will they be treated? Again, I go back to the quote from Thomas More that the person expressed their opinion on, commented on, that at first you make thieves, in this instance, criminals of our youngsters, and expect that they're going to come out on the other side better human beings. It's unfortunate. All right, we have the other caller. the person, we're losing them. Oh, the call isn't working at the moment. So, Jade, one of the things, again, I want us to go back to the submission that JFJ made. We also saw some incongruence in the sections, So let's be tough on crime, but the sections in Jamaican language, they don't make no sense. Well, section 5, 14, 15, if you remember what they mean, you remembering off the top of your head?
Section 5 is always fresh in my memory because you know that is my major issue with mandatory minimum sentences.
We have the caller, but just quickly, just tell us how the different sections just to make the sense.
The issue is that if it allows for the police to have a discretion that we've never seen the police have before, at least not in my research.
So it's shifting from judicial discretion to
police discretion,
because the police will do what?
The police are going to decide what to charge you with.
So it's either a charge for illegal possession of firearm for you to get the life imprisonment,
or I charge you for having the possession of firearm with intent, or possession of firearm that was actually used in a felony. So it's like 3 different offenses, 3 different mandatory minimum sentences, the maximum one being for mere possession with no use. So if you and a police officer have a little altercation and he decides to charge you within the context of that, so you have a firearm on you, illegal firearm, and he decides to charge you within that context, he could make his pick.
And good police officer will say the laws are unjust, so therefore let me choose the lesser offense. And someone who lacks a little bit of integrity may very well open to the possibility of corruption. But anyway, who's the caller we have? Jerome?
Hello, hi.
Yes. Hi, Jerome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, ladies.
Good afternoon.
First, I want to start by saying I saw your tweet this morning.
Which one is that? I've been tweeting since 6 o'clock in the morning.
Sorry, the one where you tweeted about the person saying you should have died in the shooting.
Yes.
I must say that is very unfortunate, and that speaks to the minds of our young people and the people in our environment. But what I'm talking about, I want to talk about is Dr. Chang's comments. Because I have mixed views on that. Because on one hand, I get what he's saying.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I can see how it's problematic because one, when someone attacks the police, and I saw your argument, and I get you guys are saying police should defend themselves, but the aspect where Dr. Chang says they're not sending any ambulance for them and stuff like that, where he's saying it is costing the state $10 million to save someone's life, when that resource could be used, how I interpret it is that resource could be used to save someone else who is not a troublemaker. When you think about it on the high crime rate, imagine walking down, somebody gun you down, and for only you to shoot them, and then they take them to the hospital, and then they come back around a few years later, or months, come back for you, or to rob someone else. What I'm saying is, I think some persons are beyond reform. I am not judge and I'm not jury, but I think some persons are beyond reform. So what about those persons?
What I would say is, one of the problems that we have is that we don't try reform. So when we say persons are beyond reform, we're basing that on whatever action they would have took. But that action is as a result of their existence in the society out here with us.
It just not happened in the justice system in Jamaica.
Right. We have never tried to reform anyone. So I think we can't say that there are persons that are beyond reform based on their actions. Because I think one of the gaps that we have in trying to understand criminality is why are these crimes taking place? If, for example, we've had several high-profile killings happen over the past couple of months, and we would have, of course, had an emotional response where we want to see punishment in the law. But what we never considered was, why did these things happen? Because at the end of the day, when we punish this one, what is preventing another person from doing the same thing? And if you're going to tell me it's the punishment, that's clearly not the case, because we would have been punishing these persons quite harshly.
And Jade, the issue is, even if someone is beyond reform, it cannot be the response of someone who is a medical doctor, the Minister of National Security, and you see me going up in stages now, and the Deputy Prime Minister, who is going to be publicly stating that you leave someone to die, the implications are far too great. So you better not be a victim of gunshot wound and look a particular way that you can be discriminated against. Because anyhow you go to a public health facility, based on instructions of Dr. Chang, perhaps you would not be treated. And the other thing, kudos to Dr. Chang for arguing and making a statement that persons should see some social interventions. From JFJ's standpoint, we have yet to see what those social interventions are and get the costing for those. So we'll see. But another 30 seconds for you just to indicate what else you have to tell us.
Yes, and the other hand, I was talking about at the same time, some of these police officers who are out there who Dr. Chang is giving the order to shoot to kill, some of these police officers themselves are corrupt. So when Dr. Chang is equipping the police to go ahead and shoot to kill, they themselves, the police force, needs to be reformed. In the core of the police right now is corrupt. A lot of young people don't trust most of the police because there are some police that young people trust. But for example, the case of Noah Maitland, there are other police officers who aren't earning, for example, over $2 million, but yet still they have a lot of resources. The car they're driving, the whole.
I want to caution though, the Noel Maitland case is still before the courts.
Yes.
You know, at JFJ can't take a lawsuit up in here, so let me just fix that statement completely where that is concerned. But we have to leave, Jerome. Thanks so much for calling. But one of the things we have to look at, Jade, and listeners generally, is how we are not emotive in certain things, really. And I wouldn't want the officers to be listening in and think that JFJ is saying that they're all corrupt, because we have always said that we stand with the good women and the good men of the police force. But it's the bad one, then we need to weed out completely who are causing the JCF to be in disrepute.
And even so, some of the things that we advocate for, they are in protection of the JCF. If they if you got a
Body
holistic
cameras,
understanding, it is in your
things.
protection to be able to defend yourself when accusations are made against you.
Hi, Jade, we're coming up on the time, but this is our very first week, and we're not radar practitioners. We did not go to Karamak. You're an attorney, and I'm a public policy personnel, so to speak. So how was it for you?
Excellent.
It
was a good discussion. Nervous.
Oh, Lordy. All right, go on with a big
I don't know what that
there.
is.
You don't
Never experienced that before.
Let's pretend. All right, cool. Anyway, thank you so much to our listeners, and thank you to Bridge 99 FM, and thank you to Open Society Foundation. JFJ, we stand ready to support and lend our assistance to anyone who calls in. And just reminding you of our campaign slogan, justice for one, justice for all. Until then, take care.
Jamaicans, for justice, the people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many, we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or Jamaicans4Justice.org.
The people's champion.
99 FM. The Bridge 99 FM.
The future of advertising to the diaspora and Caribbean markets resides only on the bridge. Get on now. 876-669-5000.
Chasing purpose is a journey of self-love, self-development, healing, and spirituality. Our talk show aims to empower, inspire, and uplift through thought-provoking conversations. Guided by our 4 pillars: nurturing faith, setting intentions, pursuing aspirations, all while we are living boldly.
Every time I feel, can't do no different. Swear me off a win.
Won't you join us every Monday and Wednesday, 10 a.m. to midday, for Chasing Purpose, where we sow seeds others will benefit from.
That's why I'ma try again.
From Flat Bridge to the George Washington Bridge. From the top of the Empire State Building to the Blue Mountain Peak. From the Grill Point to Morant Point to Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, New York City.
The Bridge 99 FM.
After the 2 o'clock on a wonderful Tuesday afternoon. I wonder if I can grab Abs on the microphone. Good afternoon, Bridge Nation. Oh, you're lucky. No, you can't talk because I don't have control over that. She gone, super duper, she gone. Good afternoon to every member of the Bridge